Mr. Pond Boss, tell me what to do to make all my Lunker Lake dreams come true.
Hello everybody, Bob the Lusk, the Pond Boss, coming at you live. This must be Wednesday, February 16th, 2022. For the next hour, we will spend some time, hang out, tell stories, answer questions, and we'll just go wherever you want to go. I see Chris Arthur checking in. Good to see Chris. This is a Wednesday night date night, kind of like Wayne and Josie do. I think that's just cool as heck. I don't know why you do it, but I know, because you're entertained, right? There you go. I see. That's it. I see Wyatt checking in. Nick is watching. Glad to see you guys. Trying to, I got my thing going on here so I can start seeing what everybody's typing up. So if I can figure this out. Oh boy, let me see here. There's Drew Bachman, Billy Bates, good to see you. Billy Granholm from McLeod Aquatics in Elburn, Illinois. We need to get to know each other, brother. I need to know more about you. Hey, you guys know the drill. Hashtag Pond Boss Magazine in the comments section. Click like, or actually click the little heart love thing. Share this to your timeline, and you're eligible for a drawing for a Pond Boss hat and a Pond Boss shirt, t-shirt, I think it is. So if you guys will do that, that way we can kind of spread the love and spread the word. So now I'm going to see if I can figure out how to fix what I just messed up to make sure I can read your questions. Eastbound and down, Wyatt says. All right, so on here somewhere. Oh, there it is. Holy cow. Here we come. Oh, now I can see everything. Hope this is the right one. Yep, all right, so Kenneth Primo. I see Kenneth. Todd Austin, good to see you, brother. Looks like we got 27 people that we know about. I think what I'm going to start off talking about, there's Mike McPherson from Indiana. Good to see you, Blair Ullring, Mike Cottrell, Palapetty County, Troy Todd. Dave Weber, my friends say I'm in Fish Church every Wednesday at 6:30. Yeah, preaching from the book of Pond Boss, chapter 1, Habitat. That's where we're going tonight. John Funk, Mid-Michigan. It's 48 degrees there with a low of 9. Oh boy. Yeah, you know what? It's pretty pleasant today. We're supposed to have a front blow through, a little line of showers that might spin on us a little bit in the middle of the night, which that's okay with me because we could use the moisture here like most people around the country. I see Travis Smith, Brian Baker, Randall Mann, Doug Cusick, Michael Gray checking in. It's probably dark enough over there in Tennessee that he's not in the cab of a Traco right now, but it wouldn't surprise me if he was, because those things do have lights on, at least his does. Bill Russell checking in from South Alabama. We've got lots of folks checking in from Alabama lately. Randall Mann's from Kentucky. Dave Fontaine, Dublin, California. Wow, that's very cool. Jimmy Mitchell. John Funk, how's the book coming? The book is finished. Except I do have to find about 10 more photographs for Rob. He's got some empty pages and he wants to plug some pictures in. So I've spent a little time today sorting through photographs so that thing is ready to go to the printer. So he's waiting on me to collect a few more photographs, and that'll be done tomorrow. Yep, Maddie's checking in with Chris. That's good. Del St. Julian from upstate New York just finished the Institute. That's fantastic. I saw where you'd register for that. I really do appreciate you doing that. That kind of helps. It helps you, and it helps us. So Chico and I are working on one more video to add to that, which will be about pond construction. I don't know that it's going to be ready for another month and a half or 2 months, but we're going to get that up there. And once you're in, you're in. So that's great. So I appreciate that. What Dell's talking about is we've got the Institute of Higher Pondology, the Bob Lusk / Pond Boss Institute of Higher Pondology, where I think twice we've held on-site pondology courses, and I'm starting the process to do another on-site one here at Pecan Plantation when I can meet enough people and figure out how they play that game here for events. But I do think we're going to do another one for people that want to attend and get hands-on stuff. But we videoed all the sessions, plus some sessions from the last Pond Boss conference, and uploaded those. Spent quite a bit of time and effort to get it edited and make it where it's actually functional and helpful for you. So I'm really tickled that you're doing that. Billy Bates, cheaper than a Friday night date. That's right. Hey, here's what he's talking about. Here's what Billy Bates is talking about. Pond Boss magazine, $35 a year, cheaper than a Friday night date, and it lasts a year. When's that date over? Saturday morning. Or actually, mine's over Friday night. But this issue of the magazine has got some really, really good articles. And one of the topics I want to talk about tonight, I spent 5 hours today working on an article that I at the risk of sounding a little pompous, because I don't want to do that, I think it may be one of the most important articles that I've written in a long time. And it'll be in the March-April issue. Yeah, Josie, I'm laughing at that too. Fish Church, that's it, from the book of Pond Boss, chapter 1. Mark Overby's watching. Good to see Mark. Glad to see you watching. I wrote an article today. I've been thinking about it for it's been in the front of my brain for over a month. And I've kind of been trying to figure out how to put it together. But what it is it's an article about habitat and the significance of habitat. So I want to spend a few minutes and talk about that, because I do want to drive that point home. The article is going to go into quite a bit more detail. It's about a 2,000 word article, which for a magazine, that's a big article. I'll have 7 or 8 photographs to go with it, but here's the gist of it. The most important thing about your pond first is the water. If you don't have happy water, none of the other fundamentals make any difference. None of the other principles make any difference, because if your water is not healthy and the fish can't thrive in it and they're too busy trying to not die, then none of these other principles make any difference. Now, there's 5 of them. And you guys that watch this show often, you've heard me say this enough in the last 4 years of doing this. But here they are. Happy water, habitat, food chain, genetics, and a harvest plan. That's it. And they're in that order. Number 1, happy water. If you don't have good, clean, healthy water and the fish are trying just to survive, the habitat's not relevant. Neither is the food chain. So it all starts with that. But the next thing is habitat. As goes the habitat, so goes what lives in it. And in the last few years, there's been quite a bit of emphasis around the nation and public fishing reservoirs or public reservoirs about degrading habitat. Because, a lot of those reservoirs were built in the 30s, 40s, 50s, some in the 60s, even some in the 70s and 80s, and not many are being built now. So whatever habitat is left behind in the form of trees and sandbars and creeks and all that, over a long span of time, that stuff degrades and deteriorates. I got to be involved draining about a 20-acre lake a few months ago, where when it was built 25 years ago, the guy that owned the property left all the timber standing. He did not cut down one tree, didn't rearrange anything. He was of that lake fort mentality. Just flood it, fish are going to grow, have a nice day, catch a trophy. Well, that's great for about 15 or 18 years, but as that wood begins to degrade and the lake begins to silt in, that habitat deteriorates. And it does the same thing in your pond. Every time it rains and it's coming across any kind of disturbed dirt, they're going to get dirt washed into the pond, and it's going to silt in areas. And then any brush that's standing underwater is going to degrade and break down. Standing timber at the surface of the lake is going to rot and break off. Those limbs are going to break off 1 or 2 at a time. And in theory, you'd think that those limbs would break off, fall down, and collect at the base of the tree. They don't. They float. And depending on what's going on that day or how windy it is, because most of the time when a limb breaks off of a dead tree in a lake, it's because a windstorm's blowing through. So that limb falls, floats over somewhere, gets lodged, and it sinks. And when it sinks, it falls into the mud. And when we drained that 20-acre lake here a few months ago, it was really amazing to see all the stumps standing up right at the surface of the water, maybe just a few inches under. So when this guy that bought the property, one of his complaints was he can't go anywhere without bumping into a stump. So part of his mission was he couldn't get his fish to grow. He wanted his fish to grow. And he had what really motivated him was he had an 80-year-old lady from his church fishing with him one day in the boat. And he hit a stump. She was a little off balance and she almost fell in the lake. Well, that was his. Now I've had it. That's enough. So he drained the lake, let it sit for about 7 or 8 months, and then got in there and took a bunch of those standing dead trees and turned them into teepees and into tic-tac-toe boards and into brush piles or ridge rows with that stuff, and then enhanced his habitat with a skid steer. It was too boggy, mucky, yucky to try to do anything with a bulldozer or a traco that was cost efficient. So he ended up rebuilding part of his dam, which was another reason to drain the lake. He needed to fix some pretty severe erosion on the front side of his dam. And so he did that. And it was really interesting. And you'll see in this article that I've written, you'll see a couple of pictures of the bottom of that lake. But part of the significance of that story that I wrote today, it's the degrading of habitat. And here's your take-home point from this part of the discussion. When you've got a lake, the fish are going to be a consequence rather than whatever you choose to do with your management strategy. I mean, I've watched rich guys try to money whip a lake. And if they don't keep money whipping that lake, it's going to go right back like it was before they started money whipping it. Here's what I mean by that. If you've got a lake that's overcrowded with largemouth bass and the bluegill aren't reproducing well enough, or the bass are just overeating the bluegills, well, in theory, what you do is you reduce the number of largemouth bass, get the numbers down, you have fewer individuals, then their growth rate starts to go up, and then you have more food. Well, I've watched lakes where guys have done that, and they start feeding the bluegill. So what should be happening is the bass numbers go down, young bass come in and begin to fill the slots and start to grow, but they run out of food. And the reason is because the habitat for that lake is absolutely perfect for stunted 10 to 14 inch bass to exist and overeat their food chain over and over and over. Because there's not enough spawning beds for bluegills. There's not enough dense structure for baby fish to hide in to become significant enough to be something more than just a morsel or a snack. And so trying to figure out the right kind of habitat is one of the challenges that I think people face. So what prompted me to write that article is the significance of artificial structure in fishing lakes. So one of the trends has been over the last few years is bass clubs, fishing clubs, matching funds, conservation organizations, agencies are throwing some money at trying to create some underwater reefs, like using Mossback Fish Habitat, for example, to go in and set some things up. And what they're trying to do really is they're trying to add habitat to these bigger public lakes, knowing that what it's going to do is increase catch rates. Because these lakes where the habitat is degraded, the fishery responds to that. It's like, in upstate New York, if we were going to go hang out and go trolling for lake trout in Ontario, Lake Ontario, they're thriving in there because they got the habitat. But if we tried to catch one of those in Onondaga Lake in Syracuse, forget it. They don't exist there. Wrong habitat. I see Jared Poole, the Hammer, fishing guide to the big fish. Good to see him. Harrison Davis, good to see you, buddy. Harrison knows the game. Good to see Jared checking in tonight. Jared's actually been on the show with me back, I think it was back in April when we were hanging out up around Lubbock at Lake Allen Henry, I think it was. So it's going pretty good. Hey, there's Drew Hay checking in. I know he's not in the cab of a bulldozer in Pennsylvania today. He might be in one somewhere in a sunny clime, but he ain't in Pennsylvania in a bulldozer. I know that. Good to see Drew Hay. So the gist of this article that I wrote today is how significant is it to have artificial structure in your pond or lake? And then how can you justify spending that much money? Well, let me tell you how it works like that. If you've taken, I've got a photograph that really, really hammers this point home. This 20-acre lake that this guy bought and drained, he decided he was going to put 4, 5, 6, or 7 foot cedar trees right off of his dock on the bottom of his lake so he could draw some fish into his dock. So he got some concrete blocks, those 2-hole haydite blocks, right? And he lashed these cedar trees to those blocks and just pitched them out right there, right off his dock. Well, 18 months later is when he decided to drain the lake. And when you guys see this picture in the March-April issue of Pond Boss, you're going to kind of shake your head, because what it is you can see the concrete blocks about, a third of the way buried in the mud, and the trees are attached, but there's not much tree left. All the needles are gone. The small limbs are gone. It's almost like a skeleton laying on its side, 2/3 buried in the muck. There's no way that attracts fish. You know, so one of the questions to answer with artificial habitat is what's the significance of it? Well, there was a study done on a lake that I've managed before, southeast of Dallas, Texas, near Athens, Texas, 125-acre lake. And Mossback worked with South Dakota State University with a master's student and a PhD student, and they collected some really good data, and they did some pretty darn good research, some empirical research as solid as it can get, which hadn't been done before. And what they figured out in that lake that was mostly devoid of fish habitat. Now, if you picture this lake, it's shaped kind of like a long salamander. We'll do it that way. And there's some water 25 or 26 feet deep. So there's what used to be a creek channel running right down the middle of it. Now the lake goes from south to north. The dam is at the north end. And then there's 4 or 5 little inlets where the creeks from that inlet come together with the main creek. And those are mostly sitting in water 8 to 15 feet deep. Those are the only places in that lake where fish were consistently congregating. So they took a bathymetry map, which is an underwater contour map, and they plotted 20 different places, or actually 22 places around that lake where they wanted to add some mossback fish cities. And the mission was to see 2 things. Does that act to congregate fish to where your catch rates can go up, and does it add to the lake's ability to produce more fish? So can they take a lake that's mostly devoid of habitat, with the exception of a few standing dead trees underwater and some American lotus in 3 coves, and can they influence the productivity of the fishery by adding some of this artificial structure? Well, they spent, I think, the better part of 4 years from start to finish, and they figured out that it took a minimum of 13% of the lake with some type of quantifiable habitat to increase its ability to grow more fish. But that's not the best. So that's what starts the upward bell curve. Now, what gets to the peak of that bell curve, where it starts to break off, is about 25%. Now, they haven't really proven that yet, but all the data is pointing at that. Now, I've been designing lakes for a long, long time, and the conclusions that I came to probably 25 years ago is when I design a lake, I want a lake to have 25 to 30% of the lake basin with some type of habitat. Now, here's how I came to that conclusion. I haven't done it empirically. I've done it from the back seat of my boat and the front seat of my pockets to figure this out. Now, spending a lot of time electrofishing lakes and studying fish, one of the things that I learned, and I figured this out, an old man told me when I was 14 years old, right out here on this river, he said, son, if you're going to be a good fisherman on this lake, you better figure this out. 90% of the fish are going to live in 10% of this river, and if you can figure out which 10% that is, you won't have to be a real good fisherman. You just got to figure out what to throw at that minute. Well, I started really believing that, and so what I'm going to tell you is 90% of the fish typically live in about 10% of your lake on any given day. But that 10% changes. It's a different 10% in April than it is in July, which is different than what it is in November, which is totally different than it is right now. So I started coming to the conclusion that 25 to 30% of a lake needs to have some form of habitat. So what that means to me is that based on the kind of fish that you want to manage and grow, you need to have places they can spawn. It takes 10 pounds of bait fish to grow 1 pound of game fish. Now, y'all already know that, but I'm just saying that for my own benefit. So if you're not providing habitat for those bait fish, then you're shooting yourself in the foot and you're shooting your bass in the mouth, because you're not going to be able to feed them enough to get them to grow where you want them to get. Whether they're smallmouth, largemouth, walleye, whatever, you got to have the right habitat for the forage fish for your target species. Got to have the right habitat for your target species as well. And when I say habitat, you need places for them to be able to spawn, places to hide, places to loaf, congregate. They got to have places to ambush from if they're ambush feeders. You know, so as you're thinking about habitat for a lake, that's all the things you need to be thinking about. Now, the other concept that I haven't written about in this article is in a perfect world, fish have a community. Like that 125-acre lake in East Texas, all those different coves have their own autonomous, unique ecosystems. So you take a big lake like Lake Texoma, you know, or even Lake Eufaula in Alabama, those lakes have regional ecosystems under the water where the fishery there is going to be totally different than the fishery over there a mile downstream or a mile up the lake. You know, and the same thing happens in your body of water if it's got much size to it. You know, if it's 8 or 10 acres or bigger, you're going to see different populations of fish. It's not like they're all intermingled everywhere. It's those fish go find the best place where they can make a living, not get eaten, have enough food, be able to reproduce, and hang out. So if you provide that, then you're going to have it. Now, when I say 25 or 30%, the way I came up with those numbers is I can't guess it. I can't guess what's good. You know, I've actually put some outstanding spawning beds in a pond, in ponds, and then come back to only to find out that they're not spawning there. They're spawning 40 feet away in an area that should have been obvious to me as the biologist, and I missed it. You know, so that I picked 25 to 30% because I'm going to guess some of that stuff wrong, and I want them to have enough of a choice that they can condition to. So how much of that needs to be artificial? Well, how much of it do you want to not rot? You know, those fish cities, that's what they call the Mossback Fish Cities. In that experiment, that 125-acre lake, they put 22 of them out that were 70 feet by 70 feet square in water. Some of them were 5 feet deep, and some of them are 5 feet tall. Some are 10 feet tall in water 8 to 15 feet deep. And they had 22 different treatments in different areas of the lake. Some in areas they considered prime, some they considered wasn't prime. Now, if you were going to go buy those fish cities in today's inflated dollars, $10,000 per fish city. Well, who's going to do that? You know, in this case, it was a well-to-do man that wanted to give back to science and do something of significance, and he could. So he did. And he spent a pretty good chunk of change to pull that off. But you know what? His fishing's a whole lot better now. You know, but what part of the conclusion is those 70 by 70 foot fish cities were great to congregate bluegill and red ear sunfish and some of the minnows and things that were grazing on the mossback plastic. But the bass, especially big bass, were lingering around the edge. So now I'd say, and I've seen this in smaller bodies of water where we set these artificial structures up in a row, almost serpentine, maybe 10 or 15 feet wide, and make them go a lot longer distance. Then you have a lot more edge cover, which is great for bass, but you also have the density that sunfish require to be able to hide. And here's some of the significance of that. If you can keep a bluegill alive from the time that it hatches, it starts off at 12,000 per pound. If you can keep that bluegill alive for 45 days, they're 30 per pound. That's a much more significant meal for a bass than a 12,000 per pound bluegill coming right off of a nest. So by the time they hit 13% on their judging their numbers, that's when they started to see a change in relative weights, an increase in forage fish mass, an increase of forage fish sizes, and they started to see an uptick in the growth rates and the relative weights and the percentage size distribution of quality fish. So 13% is where it begins to happen. 25% is about what you need to be able to really have a home run for habitat. Now, here's another caveat. If your lake's not aerated, the habitat that sits at the thermocline or above is most functional during the key parts of the year when fish are growing. Fish aren't growing very much this year. I mean, this time of year in wintertime. As a matter of fact, one of the lead articles, Do Fish Grow in the Winter? Mark Cornwell wrote that article, and his testimony as a fisheries scientist, fisheries biologist is, no, they don't. They don't grow much in the winter. They're just trying to make it through and not absorb too much of their flesh, living off their fat, feeding on a little bit of forage fish from time to time. That's why ice fishing is fun, because you can actually catch them. So, there you go. There's my spiel, and since we're about 5 till 7, I'm going to stop here, and then I'm going to start hitting the questions. There's Danny Mack, I see. Let me make sure I'm going to scroll back up here and see what's going on. Yeah, Billy Bates cheaper than Friday night date, not including the gas. That's right. That's absolutely right. Okay, let's see here. I'm going to go on down here. Pond Boss Magazine, $35 a year. We just went through that little exercise. There it is. Here's the January, February issue. We mailed this thing on December 23rd. In the post office, God rest their souls. It's the only thing and you can't call them a business because they're a government entity, that I've ever heard that said, well, we're going to raise our prices and decrease our service. We're going to slow things down. Well, I guess I'm going to have to start mailing the January issue in September, because there's a handful of people that still haven't gotten this thing. So anyway, $35 a year. And that's the economy that fuels some of this stuff. Now, also, I'm a big fan of Purina Mills. You guys that watch this show know that. Their Aquamax line of products, outstanding fish food. I totally believe in it. I've seen the results. I know what it can do. And you can grow some giant fish with that fish food. Texas Hunter products. Hey, they just launched I just found out that they launched a lineup of structure, artificial habitat as well. And I've included Mossback, American Fish Tree, Texas Hunter, and even a little sentence about fish hiding that used to advertise with us a long time ago, talking about the different companies and what the different kinds of products are out there. You know, now, if you're going to, I want to talk another minute about that and then finish my commercial, but talking about artificial structure, you may spend, for a 3-acre pond, you may spend $3,000 a year for 3 years in a row maybe, but now you spent $9,000 on that structure that's going to be there forever. Where those Christmas trees, here's something else. When I was talking to Andy Benson today, when they did those 70 by 70 foot Mossback fish cities, he said that's the equivalent density of 300 6 to 10 foot tall cedar trees. Can you imagine what it takes to cut 300 cedar trees? You buy a couple of pallets of haydite blocks, some rolls of wire, try to get somebody to help you do it on a pontoon boat. You'll wear out about 5 chains on your chainsaw, and then put all that stuff in place and then figure out, 3 or 4 years later that it's degraded. The artificial structure doesn't degrade. So, as hard as it is to swallow the cost of that stuff, the reality is that it lasts forever, and that being the case, it's a pretty good investment. It's even better than buying a truck, although it doesn't take you anywhere. A truck's going to depreciate, where that habitat's going to be there forever, and it's going to keep doing what it does every single year from now until then. So, also thanks to David Schneiderman, Easy Docks of Texas, for sponsoring this show. Texas Hunter sponsors this show. I don't know if they've got their lineup of fish habitat on their website yet, but if not, I'm sure they will. So, if they don't have it up now, they will before long. Danny Mack, good to see him. Frank James checking in from Shreveport. Michael Eric, Iowa. Christopher Aguilar, Boudin Man from South Louisiana there, Lake Charles. All right, look at there. Drew Hayes in a dozer, moving around Georgia. Love the warm, hate cottonmouths. I bet you are seeing some over there when you're scooping that dirt in that Georgia red dirt. Billy Granholm, how long after an initial stocking of bass, bluegill, and forage minnows on a 5-acre lake should I wait before considering a second supplemental stocking to ensure population growth? Billy, I'll tell you this, if you stocked it right initially, then on a 5-acre lake, the forage fish should expand, grow, reproduce, and I'm not sure where you live, but then your game fish, here's 1 year, 2 years, and by about 3 years, they're here. And at that point, then it's time to start culling some of your young of the year game fish. Now, if you can do that right, and you're nurturing your forage fish by feeding them, and you got fertile water, depending on where you are, then it's a balancing act. Now, it doesn't do any harm to add more forage fish from time to time. And if you do that, you're just trying to make up for some management cue that you missed, that's where the harvest part. Remember, we got happy water, habitat, food chain, genetics, and a harvest plan. The harvest plan, that job is to help minimize the need to restock any forage fish or supplementally stock any forage fish. You know, and I'll tell you this, if you do decide to supplementally stock some fish, stock something where there's a void. Don't go stock fathead minnows. If you did that early on, you're in year 3 or 4, fathead minnows are a waste of money because they can't establish. That might be where you should consider stocking threadfin shad or golden shiners, or if you haven't added red ear sunfish, add them. So supplemental stocking is going to be more to establish a forage fish and fill a vacant niche in your pond. That's the way I look at that. Christopher Aguilar, do I like to fish or does the pond biology interest you more? Well, you know, the way I talk, it seems like that biology interests me more. And I'll tell you this, I do like to fish. I do. It's fun. But when I tie into a pretty good fish, I don't get the same sensory perception as I do when you tie into that big fish and I get to watch you. You know, I get a lot more joy watching somebody catch a fish that maybe I helped coach them to grow. I get a huge amount of satisfaction from that. You know, and it's what's really, and maybe part of that might be because if I catch a fish and it doesn't meet my expectations, it's not as much fun. You know, I love to fish. I love to catch. Bluegill are my favorite fish. I get bluegill fish all day long sometimes. You know, I don't get bored with it. But yeah, pond biology interests me more. And I tell you, here's why. You know, at age 66, now I'm in my 42nd year, things make more sense. And the more I think about it, the more sense it makes. And the more sense it makes, the more I can convey to you. And if I can get it to make sense to you, if it makes sense to me, and I can convey that to you where you can actually do something about it, that's better than any fish I might catch, clean, and cook, you know, or even enjoy. So that's what charges me up. Billy Bates, this time of year, other than liming, what can I do right now to get ahead of some weeds like a variable leaf milfoil, for example? You know, Billy Bates, there's really not a lot you can do right now because you don't know how winter's going to end. You know, if it's really, really cold, that variable leaf pondweed is going to go dormant. And if your pond's down a foot or two, then some of it may die and not come back. So there's really nothing. There's no preemptive strike. There's no treatment. There's nothing. What you can do is start measuring the temperature. Do that every 3 or 4 days and write it down and measure visibility. And once the temperature begins to rise and the visibility begins to decrease, that's when it's getting to be time to do something about that milfoil. So once it begins to grow, if you want to do something about it, like promote it or take it out, you want to do it right about the time it starts to grow. So in order to do that, you got to be paying attention to it and checking the visibility, checking its growth, and checking the water temperature. And you're going to see a window when the water temperature is warm enough that stuff's going to start to grow. Chris Arthur, so if you happen to have more than 25%, does that hurt the population? No, it doesn't. Now, here's the answer to that. That's a great question, Chris. Here's the way that works. Every pond has its own perfect. Perfect doesn't matter because you're not going to achieve balance anyway. Balance is fleeting. balance essentially is when you got just the right amount of food for just the right amount of predators. Never happens. It's always wanting to go like this. Each one's wanting to dominate the other one way or the other. You know, so what happens at 25%, that's just optimum. You can go to 40% and you're not going to increase the lake's ability to produce any more fish. Now, once you hit about 40%, your catch rates are going to drop because you got to work harder to go find them, because instead of congregating the fish, now you're distributing the fish. Now, where it really starts to impact the fishery is when you get above about 50 or 60%, especially if that's aquatic vegetation. So if you get moss growing in there, then that's advantage baby bluegills, baby sunfish, little bass, and minnows, and then the game fish can't get to them, plus the fact that the plants are photosynthesizing and respiring. Now you're taxing the water and your water becomes unhappy. So once you hit 50 or 60%, then it gets to be a biological disadvantage. Once you hit about 70%, the risk of a fish kill skyrockets. Now I'm just talking about aquatic plants. If you've got that much artificial structure, if you've got a 10-acre lake and 7 acres has got something for fish to choose, now it's dispersing them rather than congregating them. And that's going to decrease the lake's ability to produce fish. Because if you're not congregating bait fish where bass can get to them, then it goes back to that wandering nomadic concept that I was talking about earlier. If you don't have any habitat in the lake, then the fish are nomads. They're chasing something all the time and they can't gain weight. You know, so if you have more than 25% up to about 40%, that's not bad. But if you get much above that, then that's when it gets to be a little bit of an issue. Jonathan started, what are the pros and cons of ag lime versus calcis? Well, calcis, you know what? Somebody correct me. I'm trying to remember because that's a brand name. I'll tell you this way. Here's what you want. Ag lime is dolomitic lime, which is calcium carbonate. That's what you want because you're really trying to increase the alkalinity. That's what carbonate does. Calcium is part of the vehicle and the chemistry that allows the carbonate to dissolve into the water and get your alkalinity up. So calcis, somebody tell me what it is, but if calcis, other thing about dolomitic lime or ag lime, it's not 100% lime. It's got inert ingredients, other minerals in it. So it's a percentage of calcium carbonate. You know, that's how they come up with the volume. But calcis, tell me what calcis is. I don't have it in front of me and I can't remember what it is. If calcis is not ag lime, then it doesn't if it's not calcium carbonate, it does not raise the alkalinity. That's the objective. Randall Mann, I have a pond approximately 30 years old with a size of 3/4 acres stocked with bass and channel cat. Also some black crappie and grass carp. I'm planning to add bluegill spawning areas. What's the best advice? Bluegill like to lay their eggs in gravel or sand craters in water 18 inches to 4 feet deep. So if you can provide some shelves with gravel, that's perfect. 18 inches might be a little shallow because great blue herons can wade without tickling their feathers. Yeah, if they get their feathers wet, they're not likely to wade. And if they're wading in 18 inches of water, they're likely to come in and pluck off some of your better spawning bluegills. So the bluegills, where you've already got an established pond like that, you want to stock adult bluegills, 5, 6, 7 inches long. So those spawning beds, if you can make them about as big around as the hood of a pickup, that works pretty good. I would put, if you can, I would put geotextile cloth down and put about 4 inches of gravel on top of that. Spread it flat under the water in water 18 inches to 4 feet deep. If you can do that, create some shelves along a slope. That works pretty good. And for a pond that's 3/4 of an acre, you need 3 or 4 spawning beds about as big as the hood of a pickup. If you can do that, you're going to see your spawning rates go up. Harrison Davis said, what weight would a trophy female largemouth bass need to be at for you to say now that the fish has good genetics? Well, every trophy bass starts off as a fry. So a trophy female largemouth bass to you might be different than one to me. I mean, I've seen areas of the country where a 6-pound bass, that's a home run. Upstate New York's one of those places. You know, a 6.5-pound bass, that's about as big as they get there. I know their state record's 10, but that was years ago, and I think somebody might have hedged something in there we don't know about. But what weight would a trophy female largemouth, I'm going to make a couple of assumptions. A weight, to me, a relative weight, if a female largemouth bass is 18 inches long, weighs 5 pounds, that's a trophy bass, because I know in 3 years, she's going to be double digits. And I know in 6 years, she got a shot at 14 or 15 pounds if she has happy water, the best habitat, a food chain, and has the opportunity. Now, she's already got a great opportunity because she got to be that big so far in about 2 or 3 years. You know, so a direct answer to your question is 120 relative weight, young, on its way up. That's what a trophy is to me, and it might be a 2-year-old 3-pounder. You know, it might be a 4-year-old 6-pounder. You know, but as long as that relative weight is up and that fish has got years in front of it and the opportunity avails itself, you know, nothing to remember about fish. If a fish misses a meal and it misses another meal, maybe it misses 3 days and then gets to eat good, it can make up those 3 days. But if it goes 5 or 6 days without a decent meal, it can't make up that. And every lost day can't be made up. So just because, where people mess up the most by trying to grow trophy bass, in my opinion, is they don't recognize it when those fish are 10 to 14 inches long and they're not culling well. Because if you don't provide enough fish, and that fish at 10 to 12 inches long or 14 inches long sits there for 2 years, it may have the genetic propensity to hit 15 pounds, but it's only going to top out at 9, 10, or 11 because it lost a year at that intermediate size class. And I think people mess up by not paying attention to that right there. Okay, at what weight would a trophy female largemouth bass need to be at for you to say now that fish has good You know, if a fish makes it to 5 pounds, that's a female. You know, and if she's 5 pounds and 3 years old, that's a trophy. So that's kind of it's hard to quantify that because a trophy to you and maybe not to me. Ben Kusturin, it's maybe off topic, but does tagging fish affect the fish in a poor way at all, as in behavior? No, it doesn't. That fish doesn't know it's been tagged. You know, now if you do the tag right, like if you're going to use a Floyd tag, you need to inject it right beside the dorsal fin, down in the meat, push it down in there far enough where only the numbered part of the tag's sticking out. If you can do that, that fish doesn't know it. If you want to inject a pit tag in it and read it with a reader, the fish has no idea. It will not affect their behavior at all. I've watched that over and over and over. Danny Mack, he loves to see other people catch his fish. Yep, that's right. Troy Todd just ordered a couple of duck boxes. Looking forward to spring here in southern Indiana. Yeah, I love that. We had wood duck boxes. We got to be friends for a long, long time. Still are with Bob and Donna McFarland, who have become kind of the wood duck gurus of East Texas. And they actually have cameras in some of their boxes. And they've got some of their wood ducks named. And they've been doing it for probably 15 years. And it's pretty dang cool. Jonathan Stoddard. Calcis is a concentrated liquid calcium carbonate. Okay, I wanted to say that, but I didn't know it. You know, the brands kind of throw me sometimes. I think Calcis is fine to use. It doesn't take nearly as much because it's concentrated. Stuff weighs a ton, you know, and so as long as you get the right concentration of calcium carbonate in the water to get your alkalinity up above 40 or 50 parts per million, up to 130, 140, then you're doing good. And that's good. So yes, I'm a fan of Calcis now that you've flushed out my memory with a little more limestone. Appreciate it. All right. Kenneth Dwiggins, where are we with you having a YouTube link? Because the world needs your insight. The world. Well, we have a YouTube link. We have a Pond Boss YouTube channel. And Leanne, when she gets time around all of her other duties, she uploads all these videos onto our YouTube page. It's Pond Boss YouTube page. But what I am getting ready to do, I love doing the Facebook Live because I get to interact with you guys. But now if you're going down the road and you're looking for a specific topic and you want to hear me talking about it, you probably don't want to hear me talking to everybody. You'd rather hear about that topic. So right over there in our house, you can't see it, but there's a little office over there. Debbie's going to turn that into a studio, and when she does here in the next month or 6 weeks or half a year or whatever, I'm going to record a bunch of podcasts, audio, video podcasts, upload them somewhere, Spotify or wherever, and the YouTube page, to where I can take these topics and drill into topics and stay on the topic and knock them out like in 15 to 30 minute increments. Now, what I am going to do is I'm going to steer you right toward the Institute of Higher Pondology. So I don't mind talking about some of this stuff, but I do want people that want to take a deeper dive into it to have the chance to do that through the Institute of Higher Pondology, which that's at pondboss.teachable.com, I think. Okay, let's see. Nick says, I read an article you wrote about golden shiners, and it mentioned a tiny ovarian parasite that they get. Is this parasite common in golden shiners throughout the U.S. or more common in warmer states? I'll tell you this. That ovarian parasite started out on fish farms way back, like in the 60s or 70s, and it's become pretty much endemic wherever golden shiners are. Because the majority of the golden shiners that are established, I'm going to speak a little bit out of my lane, but I don't think I'm wrong, originated from just a handful of fish farms in and around Lone Oak, Arkansas. So now that ovarian parasite really kicks in after the first spawn, and it doesn't make them sterile, but what it does do is it makes them only produce half the number of eggs, and each year it declines a little bit. Of course, golden shiners have a kind of a short life anyway. 3 to 5 years is pretty typical. So that's why fish farms are always hanging on to some of last year's fish to become next year's brood fish. And the thing is, if you've got a good dynamic fishery and your shiners are reproducing and you have enough survival rate, then you're going to have that perpetual reproduction. But if all you've got is a whole bunch of shiners that are 6 or 7 inches long, odds are that their reproductive capacity is low. Kenneth says, any traps you know of for catching crawfish since they're spreading everywhere? You know what? This South Louisiana, Southeast Texas, they've got a pretty good market cornered for crawfish traps. And you can sure buy crawfish traps. And most of them, I've seen 4 or 5 different kinds. My favorite one is shaped almost like the nose cone of a rocket from the early 1960s. Where there's a capsule coming up and then there's a tube where you drop the bait down the tube, and then there's little cones around each side where the crawfish can come in to eat the bait. And then you can pick it up and dump them out the tube from the top. And you get in a boat and the tube's sticking out of the top of the water and they can't get out. So that's my favorite kind of trap. I've run lots of those things back in the day. I ain't gonna do it much anymore. You can. All right. Danny Mac, I wish we could get wood ducks. Holy cow, things are happening here. Let me go back. Danny Mac, I wish we could get wood ducks, but maybe the climate change will give us more rain like East Texas. You know what, Danny Mac? I don't know why wood ducks wouldn't come to San Antonio. If you've got them, you'll hear them because they make a really cool sound when they're flying. It's kind of a shrill shriek. Say that 3 times and see what happens. Josie, that was one of Wayne's Valentine gifts. Wood duck boxes? That's pretty cool. Those are neat. I love wood duck boxes. Billy Granholm, will you be planning any in-person Pond Boss Conference Pondology for 2022? I'm working on that now. I'll have an answer for you here probably in a couple of weeks, because what I'm doing, where Debbie and I have moved here, they have a nice small hotel in the country club. They've got a conference room and food and beverage, and there's some ponds on the place. And I can get access to the equipment that I need to go sample those ponds and lakes. So the short answer is yes, I'm working on it, but I don't have details yet. Now, we are thinking about having another Pond Boss conference. However, we've not committed to that until we see where COVID's going to go and how the politicians handle this stuff. Right now, I don't think it would make sense to schedule a conference with the lack of fluidity in our society. So I don't want to do anything like that because it's a pretty big financial commitment to do a conference. Not quite as big a commitment to do an on-site pondology deal. Okay, so let's see here. What else we got here? Colton Ridenhour. We have a 28-acre lake in eastern Kansas that has a lack of habitat throughout and water clarity to a point where we have to fertilize yearly. Our fish population has an extreme overabundance of 9-inch bass. We do a yearly harvest where we shock and relocate to the other lakes. Looking forward to reading your article on artificial habitat. This may help us get over the rut we seem to be stuck in. Dude, I totally get that. Are you, let's see, so you might be around Lewisburg or down around, oh gosh, Fort Scott through there. If you've got one of those lakes that used to be a mine that's prevalent in some of that area, is there right along the Kansas and Missouri border, one of the things that might be lacking as well is lime, minerals. Alkalinity may be a little bit low. So if you want to visit with me, send an email to info@palmboss.com. We can have a conversation and I can talk to you about it. I'll either write you or call you. If I'm driving, I'll probably call you so I can kill two birds with one stone. But yeah, and when we really start looking at artificial structure, I'm telling you, when you start digging into that, you think, holy cow, we're going to spend 20 grand to take this 28-acre lake and turn it into something that's better. Well, you're not going to eat an elephant all at one time. Bite it off. Even if it takes 5 years, spend 3 this year, 5 next year, or whatever. But come up with a plan. And the plan is going to be based on the bottom of the lake and what it already has. If you've already got some reasonable habitat, you want to enhance it. So what I tell folks that are thinking about adding some structure, whether it's trees on site or rock piles or piles of concrete blocks or Mossback fish attractors or Texas hunter attractors, whatever you got, or American fish trees, whatever, I like for you to map the bottom of the lake so we can see the contours and see what the lake has to offer. It doesn't make sense to go up into a shallow cove where it's only 3 feet deep and add 5 little fish attractors because they're going to be irrelevant. So if in between now and the time that you get ready to do something, take a depth finder and go map the lake and create an underwater bathymetry map. Get the contours. That's going to be your starting point to decide what you want to do about adding more structure. Okay, looky here. Doug Cusick's talking to Danny Mac. I put up 2 wood boxes in my 2-acre pond, but on pressure treated posts, just clean them out. Yep. I have actually seen it take 4 or 5 years for wood ducks to find a box. But when they finally do find it, they're there for the duration, and I think it's worth it. I mean, you're going to spend $70 or $80 on a wood duck box and probably another $40 to put it up. So you got $110 in a wood duck box. And if you buy a good one that's not going to degrade and rot, over 8 or 10 years, then it's worth it. Hello, Kenny Sanderson. Colin Owens, is it worth trying to build a sustainable minnow forage for bass and bluegill, or is it best to just bite the bullet and feed pellets? I think it's worth it to try to build a sustainable minnow forage, but you're not going to do it with fathead minnows. You'd have to do it with something more like golden shiners. So remember what I said at the beginning of this. Happy waters first, habitat second. If you want to establish minnows, what do they need? How do they spawn? What do they eat? Where do they like to live? And if you can provide those things, then your odds of creating a sustainable population goes up. And that's true for pretty much every species except fathead minnows. And that's because they're so slow. It's like me running in the Olympics. I'm going to get eaten alive. I'm not even going to watch the Olympics. Ain't going to happen. Fathead minnows aren't either, because they're going to get eaten so fast that they can't even make their head swim. They don't have long enough. Okay, and I also think it's worth it to feed a good fish food, just because of what you get. If fish food's $50 a bag now, which is just absurd, that's $1 a pound. But if you're going to feed $1.30 to $1.40's worth of fish food to create $1 of whatever's eating it, that's pretty good bang for a buck. And so I can see that as, even if you just do it supplementally, you don't have to do it as a primary source of food. If you can prop up some of the fish with fish food, I think it's worth it. spend $50 a month and feed them a little bit. That's worth it. Okay, Frank James, for 70 feet of Fish City artificial structure, where would be the best spot to place it? Depth. Also, would it be smartest to place it perpendicular or parallel to shore, with perpendicular meaning different depths? Okay, the way they did that in that lake, each Fish City was 70 feet by 70 feet. And they placed them in those square configurations along the shore on a slope, starting where the water was 8 feet deep. So the Fish City was 5 feet deep closest to the shore, or 5 feet tall closest to the shore, and 10 feet tall farthest from the shore. So if you can imagine it, it was sitting on a slope, but the different pieces of the Fish City were sitting like this, and this. And what they found is that everywhere inside the Fish Cities, bluegill congregated like crazy. So did some minnows, native minnows that were there. A few golden shiners did as well. And so did red ear sunfish. But not nearly as many bass congregated because they were looking at it as edge cover. So they figured out that instead of having it 70 by 70, if they would narrow it and make it longer to create more edge cover, they'd still get the same effect of congregating bluegills, but they would attract more bass to increase their catch rates. Now, one of the unknowns, and I'm going to tell you what my gut says, is one of those unknowns is how many bluegill get eaten out of that second configuration than the first. You know, I'm going to tell you probably a few more. But as prolific as they are in that part of Texas, spawning 4 or 5 times a year, young bluegill were filling those niches pretty darn fast, just within weeks. So there's my answer to that. So, Rusty Bryant, do ducks and geese spread pond weeds or unwanted aquatic life? Yes, they do. They spread, I've seen them spread duckweed. I've seen them spread azolla, water meal. I've seen them spread, cormorants are notorious for spreading yellow grubs because they'll eat a fish that's infected with them, then poop it out in your lake during a flyby, and then you got the cercaria swimming around in your water. So yes, they can. Okay, Dave Weber, he's our greeter. He's the church greeter, getting ready to pass the plate here in a minute because we're about to sign off here in about 3 minutes. Ben says, how many pounds of bluegill a year should you take out of an established pond, 1/2 acre in size? You know, I'm going to tell you not many. If you're going to take out, if you've got a 1/2 acre pond that is established and the fish are feeding well and growing well, if you want to eat 40 or 50 bluegill spread out through the course of a summer and fall, then do that. But don't take the biggest ones. Throw the biggest ones back. If your biggest ones are 7 or 8 inches long, throw them back. Take 5 to 6 inches until enough of your young fish grow bigger than those biggest ones. But always follow that rule. Don't take the biggest ones you've got. Throw them back. Take the next size down. All right, Billy says, thank you for taking the time to answer my question. Heck yeah, I'm so glad you asked them so we could fill some time and answer some stuff and get some stuff to make you guys think more about this stuff. Hey, it's 7:28. This hour always flies by. You know, I really appreciate you guys. Remember, Pond Boss, go to pondboss.com. You got a number of resources. At pondboss.com, you can click on Ask the Boss. Dave Weber spends a fair amount of time. Frank James, hell, I don't know how Frank's got all the time he does to spend on that forum, but he does. So several of you guys here understand the forum, and there's where you can get a whole bunch of answers. There's over 500,000 posts, and that forum is now 20 years old. And there's some outstanding information with great people to help answer those questions. So, hey, Matt, I threw a little bone at you a little earlier. I don't know if you got to hear it or not, but American Fish Tree is going to be in an article that I just wrote. It's only a sentence or two, but I'm talking about artificial structure coming up in the March-April issue of the magazine. But $35 a year, hey, cheaper than a Friday night date. Don't forget to do the hashtag Pond Boss Magazine. Click like or the little heart emblem. Share to your timeline, and you're eligible for a drawing for a Pond Boss hat and a Pond Boss t-shirt until Leanne can find some more mugs. So I'm going to sign off, tune out, and I don't know where I'm going to be next Wednesday, but it's probably going to be right here at Lusk Landing, 3. So until next week, I appreciate everybody watching, and until then, adios.